Hey everybody, I'm Nathaniel Dodds, and welcome right into this Adobe After Effects tutorial, where we're going to be talking about After Effects expressions today, namely 5 expressions that you really ought to know. We're really going to cover a bunch of little stuff about expressions that I think you'll find interesting, because Adobe's expressions in After Effects are really powerful, and it's really incredible what you can do with them. This is going to be some pretty basic stuff, but I think you'll really enjoy it. It probably goes like basic to intermediate, I would say, if I had to take a stab at it. If you do enjoy this video, well, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel so you never miss any After Effects, video editing, Premiere Pro, you name it, tutorials in the future. Let's jump into After Effects right now and check this thing out. Alrighty, well, here we are in Adobe After Effects, and the first thing I want to talk about is changing the stroke and linking a shape to a slider to change that stroke using expressions. It's actually pretty easy. So I've got here a composition, and this one is 2560 by 1440. I threw this video in as a background. You can really do this over anything, though. It doesn't matter. What matters is I'm going to grab here the ellipse tool right there, and I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to drag out a big ellipse. It can be whatever size. I'm going to hold down Command and Option. This would be Control and Alt on the PC, and I'm going to double tap the pan behind anchor tool just to reset my little anchor point there to the very center of the circle. I can select my move tool. We'll open up our align panel, which I already have open. Yep, it's right over here. And I'm going to align the layers to the composition. I'm going to align them to the horizontal and vertical centers just like that. You can see here we've got our shape layer, and within it we have something called contents, and within contents, well, there's ellipse number 1, and within this we have a bunch of things that make up our ellipse, the path, the stroke that's on the path. If there was a fill, this would be turned on, and we would have all kinds of features in here we could play with. What I'm most concerned with here is within stroke number 1, the stroke width. If we can find a way to change the stroke width to, let's say, 125, you can see our stroke becomes larger. I'm going to bump this back down to 65. Well, we actually can do that. And this is where the first expression comes into play. To open up the expression editor, hold down your Alt key, that'll be Option on the Mac, and just click on the little stopwatch here. It's going to bump down the expressions. Now, what I want to do is I want to change this. So just quite simply, we can punch in a value here into the expressions, and it will overwrite the 65. So I could say, look, make this stroke 500 pixels, and you can see here, when I commit this, we have a stroke that is 500 pixels, and we can see there it changed to 500. So we can just punch in a value just like that. We can also do math here, so we could say like make this 500 plus 50, which obviously is going to make it, as you can see here, 550 pixels. I want to do something a little more interesting than that. Let's try something like time. So I'm just going to type the word time, and what this is going to do is, as every second of our timeline passes, it's going to grow a pixel. So it'll be 1 pixel at 1 second, see that? And by the time we get to 5 seconds, it'll be 5 pixels in size, and it'll just continue growing. Now, that's going to be a really slow growth. So maybe I could do something like, say, time, instead of saying plus 50, let's say time times, so we're going to multiply it here. That's using the asterisk. That's how we do that. So plus is to add, minus is to subtract, the asterisk is to multiply, and then the forward slash is to divide. I'm going to multiply this. I'm going to say time times like 7. Let's do that. And then if I preview this, we can see that we have this stroke here that grows as the video progresses. It just continues growing and growing. We didn't have to animate anything. It's just this one little expression. So that's pretty cool. But guess what? We haven't linked this to a slider. We haven't really learned how to change the stroke size. And before we do it, I want to show you one more thing, because this is gonna play a little bit into the video later on. We're gonna use a random function here. So we're gonna say random, and I'm gonna just type in the number 100 in parentheses and add a semicolon to the end. What this means is pick a random number from 1 to 100 and let that be the stroke width. And random is constantly, every split second, reaching out to After Effects saying, what number should I be? What number should I be? What number should I be? So every single frame, this is going to change. You can see here the first random number is chosen, 37.5. So let's check this out. And look at that. We can just see it's this crazy flickering stroke effect. So this is some of the power here of expressions if you've never used these before. Now, let's go ahead and play around with linking this to a slider. How do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to get a slider. So I'm going to collapse my shape layer for a quick second. I'm going to right-click down here and choose New, and let's just add a null object. This is just the way I'm going to work with these sliders. You can really add the slider to the shape layer, but if you're new to all of this, just follow along with what I'm doing. It'll work fine for you. I'm going to right-click on this. I'm going to rename it. Let's name this controller, because we'll keep all of our controllers on this layer. In fact, I'm going to rename it. I'm just going to name it controls Let's go with that because we're going to have a bunch of different controls on this layer, so that might be the better way to name it. Then I'm going to come over here to my Effects and Presets panel, and I'm going to search for Slider. And here I've got this Slider control. I'm going to drag this, and I'm going to drop it onto our null object down here. And you can see we have this Slider control, and right now the slider is set to 0. If we toggle down the circle, we've got this slider that goes 0 to 100. Great. We can actually go beyond 100, but we're just going to live with what we've got here. So we've got our slider. Now, how do we link it up with the stroke size? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Let's toggle down the shape layer. Let's go to our stroke width here. Let's Alt or Option click on the little stopwatch. And we've got this little pick whip here, this little twirly twinkle thing here. All I need to do is drag this and link it with that slider. Now, the slider is hidden because the slider sadly only appears when we click on the controls layer here. But if I twirl down controls, I have effects, and under effects, look at that. There's our first slider control. Look at that, slider control. It's as if it's the same thing. Well, because it is. And here's the slider. So basically what we want After Effects to understand is this stroke width, we want it to be whatever number this slider happens to be. And we can link them by dragging this pick whip up and linking it right to that slider number. And After Effects is going to write this bit of code that we don't have to write out by hand because we just use the pick whip. And now our slider's at 0, so of course our stroke is 0. But if I crank this bad boy up, you can see that we now have a 163 pixel stroke on our ellipse. Now, why is this useful? Why all this rigmarole for just a little stroke adjustment? Well, let's say you're selling an After Effects template, and somebody doesn't know how to, you don't know how advanced somebody is using After Effects. Well, it's very easy to create a help file that says, hey, go to your Effect Controls panel, click on your controls layer, and you're going to have all kinds of stuff show up here for all kinds of sizing and positioning and color controls. You can have it all show up here, and you can link it so easily to the different parameters just using the pick whip and using expressions. Now, before we move on to the next expression, let's just type in the word control here so we can check out all these different controls. Another control that I want to cover just super quick is the color control. So I'm going to drag a color control, and I'm going to drop it on my controls null layer. See, there's color control. Great. And then down here in my shape layer, right, this is the layer that contains this ellipse, we have a color option as well. So this is really easy, right? We already did this. Alt or Option, click the stopwatch, grab the pick whip. We want to drag it up. We want to get to color control, but we don't have color control open, so open color control. There's color. We want this color down here to equal whatever color our color control has been set to. So use the pick whip for the color down here on the ellipse and link it with the color in color control. And when it updates, you're going to see that our stroke is going to become red because that's the color that we've got. So now when somebody comes into their effect controls, they can also change this color to whatever they want, blue or green or orange or whatever. Let's go, actually, let's use the eyedropper here, and let's sample like one of the very light aquas from the water down here so we can kind of keep our document all working and jiving together. I'm going to go with a very light aqua, though. Let's go with something like that. That looks nice, and I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so expression technique number 2. I'm going to collapse the controls for a second. We'll get back to that in a moment. I want to go ahead and select ellipse 1, and then from this little add menu here, I want to choose to add a trim paths. So we're going to create a slider that allows us to reveal or hide parts of our path. In fact, if I twirl down trim paths, we have start and end, and if I crank up start, you can see how it's like the path disappears. And if I bring it back to 0, we can see the path reappears. Great, right? Well, I don't want somebody to have to dig through and have to know what trim paths is and all that. So let's link this to a slider, and I want to go a step beyond. But let's go ahead and select our controls layer here. We've got our slider control in the effects panel. Drag another slider control out. This is slider control number 2. I'm going to twirl down slider control and slider control number 2. In fact, I'm just going to collapse these first 2 slider and color controls because we're done with them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with start here. If I want to have control over my circle unfurling in that direction, I'll go start. If I want to have it going the other way, I can work with end. So just whatever you feel like doing here. We could go both, but that makes things a little more complex. We want to try to keep this relatively simple. I'm going to Alt or Option click here on the stopwatch for start. I'm going to grab that pick whip, and I'm going to link it to the slider. Now, as I drag that slider, if I select controls, as I drag the slider, you can see if I drag it back, nothing's going to happen because the starting position of the start here is 0% already. But if I crank it up, you can see we start to make the circle disappear. Now, what happens when we go beyond 100? Well, nothing, but I just don't like that. It doesn't seem professional to me. It seems like it should just live between 0 and 100. So how do we make that work? Well, we can do that by adding what's called a clamp expression. We can add it directly to this slider. So I'm going to Alt or Option click on the slider stopwatch. This is slider control number 2. And I can delete all this junk that's in there. And we want to add what's called a clamp. So I'm just going to type clamp And then I'm going to add an open and close parenthesis and a semicolon. And here in between the open and close parenthesis, we have 3 parameters. So I'm going to go 0, 0, 0. So these 3 numbers all are important. So the first 0 here, I'm going to highlight it. And what I want to do is, this basically is saying, hey, what are we clamping? What are we limiting? So I'm going to take the pick whip here with, notice I have that 0 highlighted. That's it. I'm going to take the pick whip and I'm going to say the slider. This thing that we're adding this expression to, that's what we're limiting. And you can see it's going to write the code needed to target this specific slider. And the next 2 numbers are, all right, what are we limiting this to? Well, we want to limit it from 0 as the beginning number, and the absolute highest number will be 100. There we go. It's that easy. We added a clamp effect to this. Now check this out. See how this number's red? What happens if I try to go down below 0? Uh-oh, I can still go below 0. But when I let go, you can see it never goes below 0. And when I crank it up, you can see I can go up past 100, but it never really goes past 100. So I'm going to set this back to 0, and there we go. We just added this nice little clamp effect just to kind of crunch down on the slider a little bit and make sure it stays within that range that we know we want it to remain. All right, I'm going to collapse the trim paths. I think I'll even collapse the stroke for a moment. Let's apply a turbulent displace to this to make this circle a little waggly and wiggly. So I'm going to type in displace, and there it is, turbulent displace right there. We're going to drag this, and we're going to drop it here on the shape layer, just like that. And down here under effects now, we're going to have a turbulent displace. That's great. And before we go any further, let's add another slider to our controls. So I'm going to go slider, there it is, slider control, drag and drop it on the controls null layer, there it is, slider control number 3. I'm even going to twirl that down because we're going to be targeting this in a moment. Now, we're going to do a little bit more of an advanced mathematical equation here. It's not really that advanced, but it's just more than typing in a single basic number. I'm going to twirl down turbulent displace. Now, I don't want this. See how this graphic is just static blob looking? I want it to look like it's alive and moving and just turning into all kinds of different things and mutating and being totally random. What's going to allow me to do that is by causing this evolution number to change. So as evolution changes, you can see this is going to change. So I'm just going to undo that, actually, what I just did. We're going to select evolution and Alt or Option click on the stopwatch to open expression. We're going to grab the pick whip, and we're just going to link the evolution number to, well, you probably guessed it already, to slider control number 3. Now, part of the problem is that in order to really make this evolution change, we need to change it entire revolutions, entire 360 degrees. Like each time this goes to 1x, that's like 360 degrees, right? So that's going to be a lot of clicking and dragging up here on this slider, right? If we pull this up to 360, finally we have one evolution, so to speak. I'm going to undo that. So we need to make this a little bit easier. So what I can do is I can come back down here and say, yeah, go ahead and get that number from slider. So go up there, this is the slider, but I don't just want you to get that. I want you to multiply it by a certain number. So I'm going to say, look, multiply this by like 100, all right? Now, watch what's going to happen here. We're going to play this, and you can see we still have a static looking shape. That's not at all what we want. So we're changing the evolution, but we're not getting what we want here. So we want to randomize this number. Remember we did that random thing earlier on? Well, remember, part of the beauty of random is it's always going to After Effects and saying, here's another new random number. Here's another new random number. Here's another new random number. So I'm going to type random. And we're going to go with a large number here. So I'm going to say the smallest random number you're allowed to pick is 100. And the largest random number will be 800. And then close that parenthesis and semicolon, all of that. So we're going to take whatever number is in the slider. So if it's 1, it's going to be 1 times anywhere from 100 to 800. If this number is 2, it'll be anywhere from 200 to 1600, and so on and so forth. So now if we play through this just like this, well, you can see it's still static, and the reason for that is actually pretty simple. The slider is at 0, so we need the slider to be at 1. Now if it's at 1, we're going to have a shape that is in constant motion. It's always flowing between 1 and 800 in terms of the evolution number here with our turbulent displace. Of course, if we crank this up to like 4, it's going to be even more extreme because we've got a crazier number of evolutions going on. It's 400 to what would it be, 3200. So it's just making it more and more extreme. The slider is going to sort of act as the force multiplier. Now, knowing that the slider can get very extreme, we should probably go ahead and give this slider a little clamp and clamp it down between 1 and let's say 5. So I'm going to Alt Option click on the slider. I'm going to say once more clamp. I'm going to open up my parentheses, and immediately I'm going to link right to the slider. Then I'm going to say comma. And let's say the first number, the lowest you can go is 1, and the highest number is 5, close parentheses, semicolon, boom, there we go. So now our slider is limited between 5 and 1, just like that. So we can go anywhere. Let's leave it at 2 for now and keep things from getting too crazy on us. I'm going to collapse the effects to hide my Turbulent Displace again, and we have our nice, fast, rapidly morphing and mutating circular shape. All right, so let's move along to expression number 4, and that is wiggle. Everyone really seems to love on the wiggle expression, talk about it. It's everywhere in tutorials, so we might as well do it here. And we'll do a totally randomized wiggle as well to really drive home that whole random thing we've done a couple of times already. And let's have some fun with this. So let's go ahead here, and we'll just collapse our effects in our controls panel for a quick second. We're going to come over here to the ellipse path. I'll twirl it down, and we want to wiggle the size. So we're going to sort of allow this thing to bounce around just a little bit. Wiggle this sucker around a little bit. So I'm going to hold down Alt-Option and just click to add an expression to size. And before we even add the wiggle, because we know we're going to work with 2 random numbers, just real quick, let me give you an example. We'll say wiggle. This is how the wiggle expression works. You say wiggle, open and close parentheses, semicolon. Within the open and close parenthesis, we have 2 things we can specify. Let's go like 5. This is the number of wiggles per second. And then the second number is the number of pixels in any given direction it's allowed to wiggle. So we could say like 250, all right? And now if I play through this, you're going to see that our shape just kind of like, it just bounces around a little bit, right? It's expanding, it's contracting a little bit. It's doing its thing. But I want these 2 numbers to be totally randomized. So let's delete the wiggle, and let me introduce you to the idea of variables. Now, if you're totally new to this, variables will be completely new. If you're a little bit more seasoned, you've played with variables before, but variables are a ton of fun. Don't let them scare you away. Variables are basically like little containers that you can fill with information and then reuse them whenever you want. It's like a box. You fill the box, you can pick it up and put it wherever you want. You can duplicate it, and it's always got the same stuff in it. Now, this is nice because we can create a variable that figures out this random number for us, and then we can just copy these variables into our wiggle expression so we don't have a wiggle expression that is like huge and bloated and untoward. So I'm going to name my first variable A. You can name the variable whatever you want. It can be your pet's name, your mother's hometown, the most crude blue streak cuss word that your mind can conjure up. It can literally be anything. I'm just going to say A. So I'm going to tell After Effects, look, this variable that I just named A, this box named A, is going to be equal to, it's going to be filled with, well, what's it going to be filled with? Well, it's going to be filled with a random number. So I'm going to type random, and the first random number I just want it to pick a random number between 1 and 2. So basically, it's going to pick either 1 or 2 or any sort of decimal therein. Now I'm going to create a second variable. I'm going to call this one B. So again, you can name the variables whatever you want. We could change the name of A variable to apple right now if we wanted, and B to banana. But I'm going to just stick with A and B because it's less typing. And for the second variable, I'm going to type random once again. And this random variable is going to be anywhere from 125 to, let's say, 500. All right, so what's going on here? Well, at any given moment in time, because remember, the random expression is reaching out to After Effects saying, here's a random number, here's a random number, here's a random number. So at any given moment, let's go with the B variable. This could equal 125, it could equal 462, it could equal 500 even, it could equal 315, it could equal 226, it could equal anything. It just depends on what this random number returns, right? And the same thing with A. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 1.2, it could be 1.8, it could be 2, it could be 1 again, and so on and so forth. So now that we have those variables, let's go ahead and create the wiggle expression using this. So I'll just say wiggle, there we go, and open parenthesis, and the first number is just A, right? So it's whatever that random function returns, whatever that brings back and makes A equal to, that's what we want to be. That's how many times per second this moves. And then comma, and our second number is going to be B, close parenthesis, and semicolon. So just like that, we create a wiggle that's going to be totally random. I can play through this, and we can see we're getting this like crazy. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's getting bigger, and so on and so forth. And I probably should pre-render it a little bit here. Let's try that again. And we can see, you can just see how the wiggle is stretching it out. It's flickering it up and down. It's moving it all over the place a little bit. So it's doing what it should do, and it's totally random each and every time. Very, very cool. All right, I'm going to collapse this stuff. The last thing we're going to do is going to be what's called a loop out expression. And this is kind of neat. It'll save you a lot of time, especially if you do a lot of animating. So here under contents, actually, I'll open up ellipse once more. Actually, let's do this a little differently. I'll collapse ellipse. I'm going to collapse contents. I'm going to select the shape layer and just hit the letter S, and I'm going to work with the overall scaling here on this layer. And what I'll do is I'm going to tap the stopwatch here to drop a keyframe. I'm going to come out to 1 second. And actually, let's go a little past 1 second. Let's go like 1.5 seconds here. And I'm going to drop another keyframe. So this is at its normal 100%. Now I'm going to come and hit the previous keyframe arrow here to take me back to this first keyframe. And I'm going to set my sizing to, let's go like 10%, right? So the circle is going to be small, and then it's going to animate up large, all right? Now I'm going to select both of these keyframes just by shift-clicking them, and I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to go Keyframe Assistant. I'm just going to easy ease them just to add a little bit of easing there. And at this point, let's say we send it off to the client, and the client's like, wow, it's actually kind of cool. It's like totally crazy, and it's a little all over the place. And we have this animation that's kind of zooming in. But then the client says, I like it, but I want the animation to repeat. I want it to keep happening for as long as this video clip is. And oh, by the way, we don't know if this video clip is going to be 10 seconds long or 10 minutes long. We just want this wiggle waggle thing to be going on the entire time. Well, expressions make it very, very easy to just duplicate this animation over and over and over again. And like I said before, this is using the loop out expression. So Alt-Option click here on the scale, because this is what we're messing with, the scaling here. And I'm going to tell After Effects loop, and then out, and out is going to have a capital O, so a little camel coding action happening there, and then just an open and close parenthesis and a semicolon. It's that easy. And watch what happens now. Well, we can see here that it's kind of a harsh transition, right back to boom. It gets big, and then just shoots back to small. And the client likes it, but they really would like it to get large and then fade back to small, and get large and fade back to small, kind of like a heart beating. Well, we can do that. We can actually modify the loop here within the parentheses if we add open and close quotes. And within quotes, we say, look, make this not just a regular loop, but what's called a ping pong loop. Let's go ahead and do that. And now check this out. Here, we have an animation that gets bigger and smaller, and bigger and smaller, and all this craziness going on in between, which would just be so difficult to go in and manually keyframe. It's so easy to do all this with expressions. And oh, by the way, we can still go back to our controls and say, you know what? We don't like the teal. We want this to be more of a red, maybe a hot pink almost, just like that. And you know what? The stroke actually needs to be a little bigger. Let's make this, let's see how big it gets. We want the stroke to be a bit bigger, or maybe not bigger. Maybe actually we want it to be a bit smaller, something kind of like that. And maybe we want to reduce those evolutions just a little bit, so we'll knock that down to 1 to kind of chill things out. And let's check to see what we've got here. Ah, look at that. All changed, all smooth, all randomized, all animated, and ready to go, just using a few expressions. It's so easy. Oh yes, that's it. We've covered some expressions. Like I mentioned earlier, if you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. And if you're feeling extra ambitious, well, check out my Instagram channel as well. It is at tutvid over on Instagram, where I post all kinds of stuff, live shows just about every night, and a lot of other fun stuff there as well. So for expressions, and well, the wiggle expression that everybody seems to be so in love with, and also linking and working with sliders and all kinds of different things like loop out and variables and what in the world, we learned a lot today, didn't we? For this one and that much more, that's it. Get it, got it, good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one. And before you go, make sure you subscribe to my channel for more great tutorials every day. Also, buy my course. It helps us do what we do, and this channel is supported by viewers just like you. You can also just click the thumbnail and watch another video from this channel. See you next time, guys.